Welcome back to Hannity. A pretty shocking new report from the Associated Press reveals that, quote, the Islamic State group has trained at least 400 fighters to target Europe in deadly waves of attacks, deploying interlocking terror cells like the ones that struck Brussels and Paris, with orders to choose the time, the place, and the method for maximum chaos, end quote. Earlier today, ISIS purportedly released a new video celebrating the attacks in Belgium. Meanwhile, according to a new CBS News report, authorities are worried that increased law enforcement activity throughout that whole region could accelerate future attacks, shaking the bee's nest. What can the U.S. do and what can the world do to combat this growing threat from ISIS? A special edition of War Stories will tackle that very question. It's going to air tomorrow night at 10. Here's a preview.
Tonight on War Stories, ISIS ruthless in expanding their so-called Islamic State.
ISIS is hotwiring the apocalypse.
The Kurdish Peshmerga, fierce fighters standing against ISIS.
The Peshmerga are an incredible fighting force. Our efforts have been anemic so far.
ISIS propaganda calls for attacks in Europe and in America.
The threat is growing in terms of scale and scope.
Can ISIS be stopped?
It can be defeated and it will be defeated.
That's next on War Stories.
Joining us now, the hosts of War Stories, Fighting ISIS, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, and the author of Extreme Ownership, How Navy SEALs Lead and Win, Leif Babin. Great to see you both. Lieutenant Colonel, to you first, you were up in northern Iraq. How is the Kurdish resistance, the Peshmerga, faring against ISIS on the ground?
Well, it's the only military organization that has consistently beaten since August of 2014 when they charged in out of Syria into Iraq. And in every engagement, they have defeated ISIS. Amazingly enough, it's the only organization in Iraq that receives absolutely nothing directly from the United States. We have to badger the Baghdad government to give them even bullets, much less making sure that they get paid. Remarkably enough, Tucker, the Peshmerga officers, almost to a man, have been educated in the West. They speak English better than I do. And the reality of it is they come back to fight for their country. They are fighting for a homeland that they don't have yet. The bottom line of it is they're tough, they're hard, and they fight and they win.
400 fighters in Europe. That's the assessment of the Associated Press, quoting intelligence sources. It seems to me that's probably too many for any intelligence service in any of the European countries to keep track of, isn't it? 400?
Well, not really. I mean, 400 is not certainly going to be the end of the world for anybody in Europe. The bottom line of it is these guys are probably very well trained in terms of making the kinds of bombs we just saw go off in Brussels. They're probably very well trained in making sure that they can take that information that they've got and pass it on to others. Building bombs out of TATP, which is it's a triacetone peroxide is the name for it. It is a very complicated process to make. Anybody who's seen Breaking Bad knows what it's like to cook meth. It's the same thing for this stuff. And so they've got to have a place where they can do it. And what we've unfortunately done is we've relied for so long on signals intelligence that no longer works because of encryption, like we're seeing with the debate between Apple and the FBI, and the throwaway phones they're using. It means we're going to have to find a way to get better intelligence, and that means human intelligence, and they're not very good at that. Ray Kelly was in the NYPD, but those guys in Europe aren't.
Leif, to what extent are we relying on European intelligence services for our understanding of what ISIS is doing?
Well, clearly, in the aftermath of an attack, you get all kinds of good information. The problem is, as Leif knows, getting information down to the guys that need to do it, like he did, is a very difficult task.
Well, I mean, how difficult is it, Leif?
I think it's very difficult. I think they're having a hard time penetrating these Islamic neighborhoods, and obviously, as we saw from the Brussels arrest, of the lone escapee from the Paris attacks, that he had tons of support within those neighborhoods, and so I mean he was able to hide for months at a time. So one of the most wanted men in Europe.
I'm not sure that the press in the West, though, Leif, is conveying the scale here of the demographic change going on in Europe. So there are 1 million refugees absorbed into Western Europe just in the past year, a little more than that. To what extent does that magnify the threat that we're already looking at?
I think it magnifies it substantially. And when you're talking about 400 people, that's a lot. When you're talking about ISIS-trained folks who have come from Syria or Iraq to attack Europe, but there are thousands of others who are willing to take up arms. Folks like Syed Farouk in San Bernardino. and you know, the Chattanooga attacks, Garland, Texas, these things that we've seen here in America as well. So it's a major problem for us, and beyond just the military solution, we have to attack and destroy ISIS where they are in their so-called caliphate in Iraq and Syria, but we also have to take on this ideology that spawns the radical Islam and the terror that they bring. So,
Colonel North, are you satisfied that we have a handle on who's coming into this country and that the current administration understands the potential magnitude of the threat from ISIS?
Not at all. In fact, Tucker, I broadcast the 7 rules for success in dealing with terrorist organizations that were drafted back when I was the coordinator for counterterrorism. One of them is, by the way, don't brag about your successes. And of course, in Brussels, all they did was talk about they've got Salah Abdeslam and he's talking. They told everybody that. And of course, that did cause events to move a little bit faster than they were perhaps prepared for. The other part of it, just to go into some of the things that they haven't done, and we haven't done, hardening things like mass transit to make sure that you got plenty of dogs. That surveillance footage that we've shown countless times over the last 48 hours on Fox that shows the 3 guys walking through pushing baggage carts. That's what you call video profiling. There should have been somebody who's looking at that saying, oh my goodness, we got guys with one glove on one hand and a guy that we don't recognize. All of them are wearing bulky clothing. Get a dog on those guys quickly. Bad as it may seem, you don't want to blow up 5 cops, send the dog. They didn't do that. And so what you've got is a very lax attitude toward all those people that have come in. I've long advocated, well before it was said by any of the presidential campaigns, only allow vetted refugees into the United States, because that's what they've got a problem with. That's what's coming from. Leif's dead right on it.
Of course. How worried are you, Leif?
I think we need to be very concerned. You know, when the president says that this is his highest priority, and then we're really not taking any action. But we've got to continue on with our lives as if everything's great, and not let the terrorists affect us or they win. I mean, we're clearly actions speak a lot louder than words. And so, well, you know, we talk about in leadership all the time. It's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. So we could say things like that. ISIS is our top priority, and you know, Belgium will prevail, like we heard from Vice President Biden. But they actually have to take action, and we need to start destroying ISIS. It starts in their caliphate in Syria and Iraq, and it starts in combating the ideology that spawns.
Yeah, you hire these people to worry about this while you sleep, to take action while you go to work, and it doesn't seem like they are.